How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Vav, Daf 96 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, today is some daf. Some daf. Very technical. We talk about the Lechem Hapanim, the numbers of the Lechem Hapanim. Tomorrow is also going to be a lot of numbers. Tomorrow is basically all numbers. Today we're talking about the dimensions of the Lechem Hapanim, the dimensions of the Shulchan that the Lechem Hapanim fit into, that kind of stuff. So we talk about the measurements of the Lechem Hapanim and of the Shulchan. We also talk about the frame of the Shulchan. On the Shulchan, there was something called a misgeris, a frame. It's a little bit of a tricky thing, I'm trying to figure out exactly what it was and where it went. And finally, why the Shulchan is mekabel tumah. So friends, honestly, it's an amazing daf. You could tell from the description that it's a technical daf. It's a lot of details. There's a lot of details in this daf, but it's also a very gewaldig daf. We have a lot of slides. There's a lot of things to look at in this daf. So, friends, let's jump in. Friends, we begin on Daf Vav, Omid Aleph of Masechta Menachos at the Mishnah, 2-4-5 lines into Daf Vav. It's a very large Mishnah that covers quite a bit of ground. It's very interesting, in my opinion. So let's do it. It says the Mishnah, Chavite Kohen Gadol. Wow, this stuff is insane. Okay, Chavite Kohen Gadol. The Minchas Chavite that we've been talking about for ages, that the Kohen Gadol every single day, he brought a Korban Mincha. It was one Isaron divided into two. Half of it was offered in the morning, half of it was offered in the afternoon. Lishasan varichasan vafyasan bifnim. It's a big shaila. Big shaila. Big shaila. Oh, yeah, big shaila. About the Isaron. Was the Isaron kadosh? Was it not kadosh? Oh, what a shaila. I mean, a week ago, we had a three-way machlokes about was the inside of the Isaron, right, the midos hayavish, was Moshe Rabbeinu, did he anoint it with the Shemen HaMishcha, which makes it kadosh? There's a three-way machlokes. The Rambam seemed to paskin like the Chachamim over there that it is kadosh. But if that's the case, it should then it should always have to be in the Azar. But we saw yesterday that the Lechem Hapanim and the Shtei Lechem didn't have to be in the Azar. Big question. Rashi explains it one way. Tosfos is not into it. I don't really understand the Rambam. It's a big question. This whole Isaron thing. The whole what exactly is kadosh and why. Okay, I'll explain it according to Rashi. So the Chavite Kohen Gadol lishasim varichasim vafyasim b'fnim. So the way Rashi explains it is why does the Minchas Chavite of the Kohen Gadol have to be needed inside of the Azar? The answer is because even though the Isar, the Minchas Chavite of the Kohen Gadol, let's even take a step back. The beginning of the last parak was called Parak Shtei Midos. Started out with Shtei Midos B'Yavish, that there are two dry measures. One of them is the Isaron, one of them is the half Isaron. The half Isaron had one use, and that was to be able to divide the Minchas Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol in half. Now, Rashi says that while the Isaron, the larger Isaron, the full Isaron, was not Nimshach B'Shemen HaMishcha, was not a Klisharis, would not be Mekadesh, the flour that goes into it. And that's because people would use the Isaron for their own personal korbanos, and sometimes it could be taken out of the Azar. So Moshe Rabbeinu was not Mekadesh, was not Nimshach, Moshech, the larger Isaron. However, the smaller Isaron, the half Isaron, was Nimshach B'Shemen HaMishcha, because that was only used by the Kohen. It was only used for the Minchas Chavitin, so therefore there was no concern about it being taken out of the Azar or anything like that. And therefore, says Rashi, that even though the larger Isaron was not anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, and therefore you could put flour in there and it would not become kadosh, it would not become possibilina, things like that. That's why with the Lechem Hapanim, you could prepare it on Friday, and it won't become possibilina overnight. But because the minchas chavitin would then be divided in half with the half isaron, and the half isaron was anointed with the shemen mishcha, that is why the flour becomes kadosh, and therefore even just the kneading and the shaping needs to be done in a makom kadosh. Okay, fine. So chavite kohen gadol lishasim v'arichasim, their kneading and their shaping, ba'afiyasin and baking, bifnim, would be done in the azar, right? As opposed to the Mishnah that we saw yesterday, that the shtei lechem and the lechem hapanim, their kneading and shaping doesn't need to be in the azar, but the chavite kohen gadol does. Rashi says it's because the half isaron was anointed with the shemen hamishcha, therefore it's a klisharis. Okay. V'dochis as a Shabbos, and it's dochis Shabbos, because since it becomes kadosh, it would be possible belina, right? Since it was putting the smaller isar and the half isar is a klisharis, so the flour that goes in there would become kadosh to be possible belina overnight. So therefore, you wouldn't be able to prepare it in advance. You wouldn't be able to prepare it before Shabbos. You have to prepare it on that day, and therefore it's doche Shabbos. Tchinasan ve'arkadasan eino doches Shabbos. However, the grinding of the wheat and the sifting of it, that is not doche Shabbos. After Rabbi Kiva, as the rule, kol melacha she'efshir la'asos me'erev Shabbos. If there's a melacha that you can do before Shabbos, like grinding and sifting the wheat, eina, the flour, eina doche as a Shabbos, it will not be doche Shabbos. However, preparing the minchas chavitin with the klei, which cannot be done in advance because it will be possible belina, that is doche Shabbos. V'sheyev shelo la'asos me'erev Shabbos doches Shabbos. That which is cannot be done in advance of Shabbos can be done on Shabbos. Meaning, if we're talking about a mitzvah that is doche Shabbos, so for example, the minchas chavitin is doche Shabbos, but the grinding and the sifting of the wheat, of the flour, which can't, that element of it can be done before Shabbos, so it must be done before Shabbos. I'm going to drink a shtickle tea, and we're going to keep moving. Now, it says the Mishnah, Kol ha-menachis yesh ben ma'aseh kli b'fnim, ve'en ben ma'aseh kli b'chutz. When it comes to menachis, the kneading and the shaping, which is done in klei shares, that needs to be done in the azar. It can't be done out of the azar. So now this is talking about, okay, so all of these menachis require kneading and stuff in klei shares. We're going to learn out in the Gemara why. So in terms of tying it into this, complicated thing about what's kadosh and what's not. So Rashi would say, if I understand correctly, we would explain according to Rashi, look, the isaron itself is not going to be mekadosh the wheat and the flour. However, it is going to be put into a klei shares to mix it together, to knead, to shape, and that needs to be done in the azar. However, that does not need to be done, however, for the lechem hapanim, the shtei lechem, but for all other menachis, the Gemara is going to learn out why. For all these other menachis, they would have to be, but they would have to be in the azar, but not because of the isaron. The isaron itself wasn't necessarily anointed with the shemen mishcha, but because it was then put in a different klei shares in order to mix it and everything, so that had to be done in the azar. Okay. So when they're mixed and things, the kneading, the shaping, and the klei shares, that needs to be done in the azar. They can't be done outside of the azar. Now, okay, here we go. Now, shtei halechem, when it comes to the shtei halechem on Shavuos, orkan shiva tfachim, their length is 7 tfachim, so they are a bread that is 7 tfachim long. Verochman daled tfachim, and 4 tfachim wide. V'kainosav arba etzbos, and their corners are 4 etzbos. I believe that 4 etzbos is, I think that's a tefach. I think a tefach is 4 etzbos. So now, let's take a look at this slide for the shtei halechem. So, there are 3 sections to this slide. The section all the way to the left is basically showing just these measurements. That it is 7 tfachim long, it is 4 tfachim wide, and on each corner, there are these corners that are each a tefach, and they're basically separate dough. separate dough that was stuck onto each of the corners, and those also at a size of 1 tefach by 1 tefach. I don't know if they had a particular height, but I think its length and width was 1 tefach by 1 tefach. And now I have kind of two photos there. The one in the middle is some kind of photo of some kind of lechem baking workshop or something. It doesn't look extremely appetizing, but so I just grabbed a little more tea. Doesn't look extremely advertising, but gives you some kind of idea of what we're talking about. Some kind of long bread. Remember, it was not chametz, it was matzah. Some kind of long bread, and in each corner there was some dough stuck on the corners. And so we're talking about 7 tefachim long, 4 tefachim wide, and in each corner there was basically like 1 tefach by 1 tefach kind of thing. And then all the way in the third photo, you have some biblical-looking guy who's probably also doing some kind of shtei alechem representation. Looks like probably somewhere in like Yehuda v'Shomron or something. And he's holding a pan. Also, if you squint, you could probably see in the corners of the pan that there are kind of also those horns there on the side. I thought I would try to give certain perspectives as you can see what we're talking about. So, okay. So that's the shtei alechem. All right, let's read it inside again. Kol menachos, no, we did that fine. Shtei alechem orkan shiva, there are 7 tefachim long, shiva tefachim, ve'rochban dalet tefachim, 4 tefachim wide, ve'karnosav arba etzbos, and in each corner there is a piece of dough stuck on that is 4 etzbos, 4 finger breadths by 4 finger breadths, which I believe is a tefach by a tefach. Lechem Hapanim. Now I don't know yet how I'm going to do this. There's plenty of stuff to look at. We'll have to see. I'll have to figure out exactly when I'm going to stop, when I'm going to go, what I'm going to explain, when, what I'm going to show, when. We'll see. Lechem Hapanim, when it comes to the showbreads that we've been discussing. Orkan yud tefachim, there are 10 tefachim long. V'rochban hey tefachim, there are 5 tefachim wide. V'karnos of sheva etzbos, and their horns are 7 etzbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it says Rabbi Yehuda Shelo Tat'eh. Okay, I'm actually going to stop here, and we are going to look at some stuff. Even though we haven't read it inside, basically it's going to go on for a while, and I don't want to just keep on reading and translating without having something to look at. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to look at it first, and we'll see everything, and then we'll read it back inside. Take some more tea. Okay, so let's look at this slide. Alrighty. So there's a machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda when it comes to the Lechem Hapanim. So basically, as we just read in the Mishnah, as you could see, both according to Reb Yehuda and according to Reb Meir, they both agree that the length of the Shtei Alechem was 10 tefachim, and the width of it was 5 tefachim. They both agree on that. However, here is where they disagree. First of all, as we are going to, I don't remember if we reference it today. Do we reference it today? I don't know if we reference it. Tomorrow we reference a Mishnah Masechta Kelim. The Mishnah, two Mishnahs really, Masechta Kelim, talk about what is the size of a amma. Is an amma 5 tefachim? And we're going to talk about this a lot tomorrow. Mamish, a lot tomorrow. Is the size of an amma 5 tefachim? Or is the size of an amma 6 tefachim? The answer is both. It could be, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6. It could also be a little bit more than 6. We don't need to talk about that. So be'etzem, Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir agree that there are some times when when an amma is going to be 5 tefachim, and sometimes an amma is going to be 6 tefachim. Where they disagree is that Rabbi Yehuda says that the Shulchan is an example. The Shulchan and the Lechem Hapanim is an example. Not and the Lechem Hapanim. Really, the Shulchan is an example of. It says Rabbi Yehuda, the Shulchan is an example of where an amma is 5 tefachim. Rabbi Meir says no. The Shulchan is this kind of the standard 6 tefachim amma. The 6 tefach amma is really the standard. There are exceptions where we use a 5 tefach amma. Rabbi Yehuda says that the Shulchan is one of those exceptions. It's a 5 tefach amma. And Rabbi Meir says the Shulchan is not one of those exceptions, and it's a 6 tefach amma. Okay, now, that being said, So both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir agree that the Lechem Hapanim was, each loaf was 10 tefachim long and 5 tefachim wide. Now, as we learned the other day, let's assume that the shape of the Lechem Hapanim of the showbreads is like a shoebox, is like a box. So that means that the total length of the Lechem Hapanim of the showbreads is 10 tefachim, but part of it is also going to be folded up at a 90-degree angle, and so the bottom, right, the flat part on the bottom surface is not going to be 10 tefachim. It's going to be less than that. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the first thing on the left, so he says that the Shulchan is an example of of where we're talking about a 5 tefach amma. Now, let's actually look at the Shulchan now. What are we looking at? Yeah, okay, that's perfect. Okay, so fitting the showbreads into the Shulchan, great. So the Torah says, it says in the Torah that the Shulchan is 2 tefachim long, 2 amas long, and 1 amma wide. 2 amas long, 1 amma wide. You could see here on the bottom I have arrows. I have a gold arrow. The gold arrow is the length of the table, of the Shulchan. It has a length of 2 amas. And it accommodates both stacks. You have one stack and a second stack. Each stack is 1 amma. So the length is 2 amas. And the blue arrow at the bottom is the width of the Shulchan. It has a width of 1 amma. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the ammas that we're talking about when it comes to the Shulchan is a 5 tefach amma, so it means that the width of the Shulchan, the blue arrow at the bottom, the width of the Shulchan is 5 tefachim. Now, we want to fit the Lechem Hapanim, the showbreads, into that 5 tefachim space. So if you have, now we said that the length of the showbreads are 10 tefachim long, but they have to fit into 5 tefachim space. So the bottom, the flat surface on the bottom of the showbread is 5 tefachim. It fits snugly right into that 5 tefach width of the Shulchan. And then if you subtract 5 from 10, you get 5. And if you divide that further in 2.5, in 2, you get 2.5 and 2.5. So basically, let's go back to the initial diagram. So you see, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have that surface of 5 in the middle, and by the dotted lines, you'll basically fold up the dough at a 90-degree angle, and you'll have 2.5 tefachim of a wall on one side, and another 2.5 tefachim of a wall on the opposite side. And that will fit snugly into the Shulchan that has a width of 5 tefachim. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, however, the Shulchan uses the standard 6 tefach amma. And therefore, Rabbi Meir says that the width of the Shulchan was 6 tefachim. And you could see in his version of the bread here in the diagram where it says Rabbi Meir that the bottom surface of the showbread was 6 tefachim, and then that means that there are 4, right? 10 minus 6 is 4, divide that in 2 for each side, and you have, at a 90-degree angle, you fold on the dotted line, and one wall will be 2 tefachim, and opposite there will be another wall that's 2 tefachim, and you'll slide that into the Shulchan, and it will fit snugly into the Shulchan that has a width of 6 tefachim. And you can see here on the right of the slide, an example of a showbread. The white arrow is pointing to the bottom surface. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that would be 5 tefachim. According to Rabbi Meir, that's 6 tefachim. The blue arrow is pointing to the 90-degree angle to the wall. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that wall would be 2.5 tefachim, and also on the opposite side. And according to Rabbi Meir, that would be 2 tefachim. And then if we look at the Shulchan again, that showbread would then be slid snugly into the Shulchan. As I pointed out the other day, I don't know why this version of the Shulchan has poles in between the Shulchan and the snifim that are on the sides of it. It should have been kind of more snug, but as far as I'm aware. But anyways, the point is, those breads you kind of slide right in, and right, there you can see some space between the snifim and the breads, but the Shulchan itself, though, right, the Shulchan is the actual table that the breads are on. It's taking up the full width of the actual table. According to Reb Meir, 5 tfachim, and according to Reb Meir, 6 tfachim wide. Now, I'll just point out one further thing, that on the showbread, the pink arrow is pointing to the horn, right? Just like by the shtei lechem, there were those horns in each of the corners. So for the Lechem Hapanim also there are those horns. I think maybe I was wondering the other day where those come from. It seems to be this, that the shtei lechem also had, no, the Lechem Hapanim also, the showbreads also had those horns, and what the pink arrow is pointing to is, right, one of the 4 horns that by those corners, there was an additional piece of dough, I imagine, and it was 7 etzbaos, and it was kind of stuck on. We're going to learn more about that in the Mishnah and at the bottom of the Amud. I think for now I think I went through all the things I wanted to go through. I imagine maybe we'll have another look at the slides, but that was big all the stuff I wanted to do. I'll take a little more tea and we'll go weiter. Okay, so let's read it inside. Lechem Hapanim, when it comes to Lechem Hapanim, I'm about 10-15 lines in. Lechem Hapanim Orkan Yud Tfachim, as we saw, the length of the Lechem Hapanim is 10 Tfachim, V'Rachban Hey Tfachim, and 5 Tfachim wide. Okay, I'll just point out one more thing, right? So we said that the length of the Shulchan is 2 amas. So according to Rab Yehuda, who says, right, so Rabbi Yehuda says that the length of both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir agree that the length of the showbread is 10 tefachim long, and it's 5 tefachim wide. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the length of the shulchan is 2 amas, and each amma is 5 tefachim, so the length of the shulchan is 10 tefachim, and each showbread is 5 tefachim wide, which essentially means that each stack of showbreads was 5 tefachim wide, and there were 2 such stacks. So they mamish, so 5 times 2 is 10. They mamish were right. The 2 stacks were right next to each other, taking up the full width of the shulchan. Now, according to Reb Meir, however, he says that we're talking about amas that are 6 tefachim, which means that when we say that the length of the shulchan is 2 amas long, we're talking about 2 times 6 is 12 tefachim long. But Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda agreed that the showbread was 10 tefachim long and 5 tefachim wide, which means that 5 times 2 is 10. According to Reb Meir, there were the shulchan was 2 amas long. 2 times 6 is 12. 5 times 2 is 10. There was an extra 2 tefachim, which we will learn about soon. Okay, so Lechem Hapanim Orkan Yud Tfachim, 10 Tfachim long, V'Rachman Hey Tfachim, 5 Tfachim wide. Everybody agrees about that. V'Karnos of Sheva Etzbaos, and as we saw in the slide, there are also these horns on the corner that fold over that we'll learn about more later. And those were 7 finger breadths long. I believe it's 4 finger breadths to a tefach. So that was basically 1 3/4 tefachs long, and there were 2 of them, there were 4 of them really, and then, right, so the ones that were opposite each other were basically 1 3/4 plus another 1 3/4, that's what, 3.5 or something, 3.5 out of 5 or 6 tefachim. Okay, yeah, did I do that right? 1, I think, yeah, it should be 3.5, right? Fractions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Shalotate, so you don't make a mistake and you remember the measurements of the shtei lechem and of the Lechem Hapanim. Zadad, the shtei lechem was 7 long, Zayin Dalad Dalad, 7 4 4, 7 tefachim long, 4 tefachim wide, and 4 finger breadths for each of the corners. Yahaz, and for the Lechem Hapanim, it was 10, 5, and 7, 10 tefachim long, 5 tefachim wide, 7 finger breadths for the corners. Ben Zoma Omer says, Ben Zoma v'nasata ala shulchan lechem panim, the fanai tamid, and you will place on the table panim bread before me, always lechem panim, sheyulo panim, should have panim. So Rashi gives 2 options for it. Those panim are either difanots, a bread with walls, or pinos, corners, right? A bread that has corners because you fold it up. Okay. Moving on, Ashulchan Orko Yud, as we discussed earlier, the length of the Shulchan. Okay, so this is going to be according to Reb Yehuda, right? According to Reb Yehuda, who said that that the Shulchan was measured with a 5 tefach amma. So therefore, the Torah says that the Shulchan was 2 amas long and 1 amma wide. So according to Reb Yehuda, we're talking about 10 tefachim long and 5 tefachim wide. So a Shulchan Orko Yud, it's 10 tefachim long, Vrochbo Chamisha, and 5 tefachim wide. Lechem Hapanim. Now the Lechem Hapanim, as we saw earlier, Orko Yud, it has a length of 10 tefachim. V'rochbo Hey, and its width is 5 tefachim. Nosin Orko Keneged Rochbo Shel Shulchan, right? As we saw, basically the width of the Shulchan is 5 tefachim. So basically the bottom surface of the showbread is 5 tefachim. And with the extra 5 tefachim, because 10 minus 5 is 5, you divide that in half for each of the ends, and you fold up each end, 2.5 tefachim on one end, 2.5 tefachim on the other end, and you slide the bread onto the shulchan, and it fits nice and snugly. V'kofel tefachayim v'mechza mikan v'tefachayim v'mechza mikan, and you make a wall of 2.5 tefachim tall on one side and another one on the opposite side. Nimtza orko mimale rochbo shel shulchan divrei Reb Yehuda, and the length of the showbread after the sides have been folded up fits snugly across the entire width of the shulchan. Did everybody get that? Good. That is Hazoy Zot Reb Yehuda. That's what Reb Yehuda says. Reb Meir Omer. Now says Reb Meir basically a very similar thing, but he's working with a 6 tefach amma, as we have discussed. HaShulchan Orko Yud Beis V'rach Bovav, that the shulchan is 2 amas long, which is 12 tefachim, and 1 amma wide, which is 6 tefachim. Lechem Hapanim Orko Yud V'rach Bohei. He agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the Lechem Hapanim was 10 tefachim long and 5 tefachim wide. Nosin Orko Keneged Rochbo Shel Shulchan. The width of the shulchan was 6 tefachim. Now the length of the showbread was 10 tefachim, and so the bottom surface of the showbread would be 6 tefachim to fit snugly into the width of the shulchan. And with the extra 4 tefachim, 10 minus 6 is 4, you divide that in half for the 2 ends, and you fold up at a 90-degree angle both ends, 2 tefachim tall, and opposite it also a 2 tefach wall, and that's your that way you use up the entire 10 tefachim, right? 6 tefachim on the surface with two tefach walls opposite each other, and that will fit snugly into the shulchan, which has a width of 6 tefachim. Kofel tefachayim mikan v'tefachayim mikan. So as I said, you fold up 2 tefachim on either end. V'tefachayim revach be'emtza. So now, as I mentioned earlier, according to Reb Meir, the Torah said, everyone agrees, the Torah factually says that the shulchan is 2 amas long. Now, according to Reb Meir, 2 times 6 is 12. Well, according to everybody, 2 times 6 is 12. But according to Reb Meir, the amma is 6 tefachim, and there are 2 amas, so we're talking about 12 tefachim. And Reb Meir agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the width of each of the showbreads was 5 tefachim. So you had 2 stacks, each stack at a width of 5 tefachim. 5 times 2 is 10. The total length of the shulchan was 12. There was an extra 2 tefachim. What did you do with those extra 2 tefachim? So basically, between the 2 stacks, there was 2 tefachs of space, according to Reb Meir. So according to Reb Meir, what was the purpose of those 2 tefachim in between the stacks? So that there's ventilation, right? The breads are sitting there on the shulchan all week, and it prevents molding, and it allows for proper ventilation. Abba Shalom, it says Abba Shalom, Shamayu nosnin shnei baziche levona shel lechem hapanim, and says Abba Shalom, as has come up a few times, that would be actually where the baziche levona would go. That in those 2 tefachim between the 2 stacks, you would take the baziche levona and rest them on the table there. They said to Abba Shalom, the pasuk says you take the levona and put them on the stacks, not in between the stacks. Al means on. Omer loim. Abba Shalom fires back. That in the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, beginning of Parshas, but towards the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, when describing the flags and the encampment of the Yidden, it describes the Degel Machne Ephraim, and it says Ve'olav Mate Menashe, and next to him, Rashi quotes Unkelus, it says Videsmi, I think it says Videsmichin Aloi, and next to him, so Ve'olav Mate Menashe, next to him was Menashe, his brother, his older brother Menashe. So we see that Al could also mean next to. So it says Abba Shaul. That's precisely what it means here. The Bazichi Levona were not put on top of the stacks, but rather next to the stacks. I believe that is actually how the Rambam paskins. I think I've looked it up in the past. I did not look it up today, but it looks like the Rambam paskins that way. More tea. Okay. Now, back in the Mishnah. This is all a Mishnah. Givaldik. Ve'arba snifin shel zav ayusham. And let's pull out the slide again. Another slide, well, the same Shulchan, but new slide with new arrows. So, did we even use it? Yeah, we used the arrows before. Okay. Anyways, snifim and kanim. So there were these snifim. We talked about the snifim the other day. So the white arrow is pointing to this panel. Okay, so of course we've been talking about these two stacks. Each stack had two panels, one on either side of it. Now, what else can I tell you? The gold arrow is pointing to the reeds, right? We talked about the reeds recently, that in between the breads, there were these reeds. And the pink arrow is pointing to all these kind of grooves in the what are we calling these things? Panel or whatever. And in those grooves would go the reeds. The reeds would kind of go into those grooves. And I want to reiterate one more time that these reeds were not shelves. They were placed there, right? The breads were really stacked on top of each other, and the reeds were fitted in really just to ensure ventilation. Let's take a look at the Mishnah. It says the Mishnah of Arba Snifin Shazav Ayu Sham. There were these 4 kind of panels of gold at the Shulchan, Mifutzal Miroshein, that were grooved at their top. Shayusomchin Boim, and these panels would support the showbreads. Shnayim l'seder zeh v'shnayim l'seder zeh, and each stack of showbreads had 2 of these panels. V'chavches konim kechatzi kone cholul, and there were 28 reeds that, if you imagine, take like a bamboo and you cut it in half. So there's these half reeds. So there are these 28 half reeds. Also the seder zeh yudal seder zeh, 14 for each stack. 14 reeds for each stack. Basically, we're going to learn about it in the Gemara tomorrow. Basically, there were 6 showbreads on each stack, which means that there were 5 spaces in between the showbreads. And for the bottom 4 spaces, there would be 3 reeds. So 4 times 3 is 2. And for the top one, since there was only 1 bread on the top, so between the top one and the one beneath it, there only needed to be two reeds, because they didn't need as much ventilation because there wasn't as much weight on it. Okay, fine. So, okay, we can have another look quickly at the Shulchan. So basically, the white arrow is pointing to one of the panels. There are 4 of those panels, 2 on either side of each stack, and the red arrow is pointing to these grooves that we're talking about. So if you notice, there are 4 rows of these grooves, 3 grooves in each row. 4 times 3 is 12, and the top row has 2 grooves, which is 14, and then that's for each panel. So 14 times 2 is 28, and the reeds would fit into those grooves. And the gold arrow is pointing to the reeds. Okay. Now, lo sidur, where am I? Okay, fine. Lo sidur konim v'lo netilasan dorches Shabbos. Okay, as we mentioned the principle earlier, if something can be done before Shabbos, it must be done before Shabbos or after Shabbos. So, setting up the reeds and removing them was not doche Shabbos, right? Meaning every Shabbos, the Lechem Hapanim would be swapped, and so were their reeds. But swapping the reeds was not going to be Dochet Shabbos. Ella, rather, Nichnas Me'erev Shabbos, Vishomto, rather, before Shabbos, a Kohen would go into the Heichel and basically pull out the reeds from between the breads, Vinosno L'orko Shel Shulchan, and just turn the reeds at a 90-degree angle, just so that they would be removed from the breads, kind of loosened from the breads, and then I guess they would just, be left there on Shabbos. And then, okay, fine. Wait, is there? Okay, fine. There's going to be. Where are we going to talk? Maybe where are we going to talk more about this? Tomorrow's Daf? Yeah, Tzadi Zayin. Okay. And then on Motzei Shabbos they add new ones. Fine. The point being, we'll learn more about this tomorrow. But the reeds were not Docha Shabbos. You can deal with the reeds before Shabbos, after Shabbos, in the time between Erev Shabbos and when the Lechem Hapanim are swapped, and then to Motzei Shabbos, nothing's going moldy. It's enough time to take out the old ones, put in the new ones. You could do it before and after Shabbos. Okay. Kol akelim shayu b'mikdash orkan l'orko shel bayis, and says the Mishnah that all of the vessels in the Mishkan, their length was consistent with the length of the Beis Hamikdash, right? That if the length of the Beis Hamikdash went east-west, so also the Shulchan, for example, which was 2 amas long, 1 amma wide, so also would go lengthwise east-west to be consistent. Although Rashi, Tosfos points out that there are some exceptions, there are certain machlokes about this. This is just one shita. Okay, givaldig. Now, Kol ha-menachos yesh bohen. One second, just checking something. Okay, fine. Kol ha-menachos yesh bohen ma'aseh kli bifnim, mi bifnim. Okay, so we had said earlier that all of the menachos have to be, according to Rashi, have to be kneaded in a klisharis inside the azar. Shalos Rebbe Zominayin. They asked Rebbe, how do we know this? He quotes a pasuk from Sefer Yechezkel. Rabbi Omer, it says in the pasuk in Yechezkel, Vayomer Eli, that I believe that this was an angel said to Yechezkel, this is the place that the Kohanim are going to boil in klei shares es ha'oshim v'esachatos asher yofu es ha'mincha, and that they will bake the menachos. Levilti otzia lechatzer achitzona mincha zeu achatzer achitzona, right? So that they don't take it out of the azara into the outer spaces. Dumya, so mincha dumya the oshim v'chatos. So the pasuk it's talking about the mincha like the oshim and the chatos. Ma oshim v'chatos tunin kli. Just like the asham and the chatas are going to be boiled and cooked in a klishares, so av mincha nami tuna kli, so the mincha also requires a klishares and therefore becomes kadosh, and therefore the kneading and the shaping needs to happen in the azor. Okay, now we're going to talk more about the structure of the shulchan and the frame of the shulchan. The shulchan has something called a frame, and we're going to try our best to figure out what it is. HaShulchan Orko Asar, so we said that the length of the Shulchan is 10 Tfachim, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yechon says, Rabbi Yechon the Divya, Omer Tfachayim V'mechza Kofel. So it says Rabbi Yehuda, it says Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the walls of the showbreads were 2.5 Tfachim tall. So Kofel, so Nimtza Shulchan Mikadesh Chamisha Asar Tfachim Lemaila. Well, 2.5 Tfachim tall for each wall, times 6 showbreads, 2.5 times 6 is 15. So from the surface, from the tabletop of the shulchan, the Lechem Hapanim were stacked 15 Tfachim tall, which means that anything within a height of 15 Tfachim from the tabletop would be kadosh. And if anything goes on the table or anything like that, it becomes kadosh. And if it's a korban or something, it could become possible belina. The divrei omer tfachim kofa nimtza shulchan mekadesh yud beis tfachim l'mayla. And according to Reb Meir, who says that the walls of the showbreads would be 2 tfachim. So 2 times 6 is 12. So we're talking about anything within 12 tfachim of the tabletop becoming kadosh. Va'ika konim. 1 second. It's not. So let's say according to Rameir. Let's say according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not exactly going to be 15 tfachim because after all, there is a separation between each bread. There are reeds in between each bread. We have to take into account that space as well. So it's 15 plus the space between the 6 breads. So konim shakui mishakei eluhu. Well, the reeds would be kind of pushed into the doughs, into the breads, and therefore they wouldn't actually take up any space. My time, but 1 second, that doesn't make any sense. There is, after all, a reason why those reeds are there. That reason being ventilation. In order to create, the whole point is to create space between the breads. By pushing them into the breads and removing that space, you're defeating their purpose. So that they don't go moldy. Lechem, lechem. So, kami apesh, lechem. If you just push the reeds into the breads, to remove any space between the breads, you're defeating the whole purpose, and the breads are going to get moldy. They won't have any space between them for ventilation. The magba le porta. Well, they don't entirely push it into the breads. They do leave a little space, just not much, very little. Veikau porta. Well, now that, okay, well, if we're saying that there's a little bit of space, that little bit of space is being ignored. Kevan de lo have tefach lo chashiv le. Well, since cumulatively that space does not even add up to 1 tefach, it's insignificant and therefore it is ignored. We're only talking about 15 tefachim. Ve'ika bazichin. But what about the bazichin? The bazichin are put on top, or if you assume that the bazichin are put on top of the stacks, so what about the height of the bazichin? Begavi de lechem avu yasve v'lebahade lechem avu kaime. Well, they are resting on the kind of base of the showbreads, right? The showbreads are like an open box. We're placing them in the open box. They don't actually have any additional. They don't add any height since they're being placed inside of the box, so to speak, of the top bread. V'a'ika kronis. What about these corners? Right? We had said that the showbreads have these 7 finger bread corners. Well, those corners were bent over at their tops, and the breads were just stacked upon each other. Let's have a look at this slide right here, or maybe even let's take a look at this slide. So the Lechem Hapanim, right? So we see the showbread all the way on the right, and the pink arrow is pointing to that corner, that 7 finger bread corner that was, as we said. What did he say? We said. Legabe de lechem kayeflu. It's bent over into the bread, and you can as you see in the next slide, you can just stack the breads right on top of each other. The corners aren't taking up any room; they're kind of bent over. Azoy. Now we start discussing these misgerets. Sheesh. So va'ika misgarto. What about the misgeret? There was some kind of frame on the table. So now the assumption right now is that the frame was on top of the table. I tried my best to make a slide that would be able to depict what this means. First of all, I hope I understand them correctly, but hopefully this slide can sufficiently describe what I'm talking about. I've created 3 views. We're going to have 3 slides. Each slide has 3 perspectives for the table to try to describe this thing. So the first one is a bird's eye view. So basically you have a table, as you can see basically from the side view and the sawed in half view. Basically you have a table with 4 legs or whatever. You have a table, like a standard table with a tabletop. Now the assumption for now is that there was a frame on top of the tabletop. So from the bird's eye view, you could see this pink kind of frame that went around the perimeter of the tabletop, which means that the shtei lechem would only be placed on top of that, not the shtei lechem, the lechem hapanim would only be placed on top of that frame, which means if we're talking about 15 tefachim, we're really talking about 15 tefachim plus the frame. The frame was a tefach, so I think the frame was a tefach, so we're not talking about 15 tefachim, we're really talking about 16 tefachim because of this frame. right? You can see from the side view, it was right a golden table, and there was an extra tefach. There was a frame on the tabletop. You can see in the sawed in half view, right? How basically it was like a frame running along. Hopefully between the three views, you can kind of see what I'm trying to get at. So the Gemara answers, Commander Amr misgarto lemata haisa. Okay. Well, so the question was, what about the frame? It's going to add a tefach to the height. So no, this is like the Commander Amr who says that the frame was below. Sheesh, I hope I understand this correctly. So the truth is, this is the Rashi on the Chumash, at least like in the art scroll Rashi Chumash, there's something that looks different to what I can tell from here. So I'm just explaining what I could tell from here. So basically here, so this is talking about where we're saying that the frame was actually below the tabletop. So you can see here, the bird's eye view, you don't see the frame at all. All you see is the tabletop, which means that the breads were put directly on the tabletop. And if we're talking about 15, right, 2.5 times 6 is 15 tefachim according to Rabbi Yehuda. So it's just 15 tefachim. There's no extra height because of any frame. It's just a flat tabletop. And where was the frame? So as you can see from the side view, it was one tefach kind of tall, but it was very thin. It was basically like a panel of sorts that basically went around the legs, that kind of a frame. And you can see in the sawed in half view that basically it was just like, hopefully I understand this correctly, it was basically just, maybe it even went up to the tabletop. It's possible it went up to the tabletop. Maybe, I think I actually initially had it that way. And then for some reason I took it off. I have the article here. Let me actually take a quick look. What page is this? 96? All right, scratch that. This is super confusing. I'm still not sure. Here's another option. Honestly, it's super hard. I'm looking at I feel like the art scroll is describing one thing but showing another thing. It's very difficult to visualize and understand what he's talking about. Because what the art scroll is showing here is different than what he shows in the Chumash, in the Rashi Chumash, which is what I always thought of this. But then this looked different. But I feel like he's kind of describing maybe what he's showing in the Chumash, but here he's not showing that. Anyways, this is what I'm understanding here actually, is that basically, okay, still from the top of the bird's eye view, you don't see the frame at all. Okay, so the Lechem Hapanim is put straight on the table. But the in between basically the frame, the pink frame, obviously on the Shulchan it's not pink, but here it's pink. It goes from leg to leg, but beneath the tabletop. So the tabletop is lying on top of it. And the frame runs from leg to leg, and you can see from the cut in half view, it's just kind of goes, like straight between the legs and would kind of, just be flush at the end, kind of right against, from what leg to leg, and the tabletop would kind of rest on it. Oh, this is so difficult to visualize. There's so many things recently that just like require so much visualization, whether it's trying to figure out the shape of the Lechem Hapanim or whether it's trying to figure out where exactly these frames go. Like you have to be able to visualize it. And like, I haven't really found good ways to visualize it. So I'm just like trying to figure out what's going on here. Anyways. So fine. So the Amar miskarto lamata aisa. Fine. So that's if you say that the frame was actually below. Okay. And okay. So then the breads were just stacked on top. And also though, and ulamando Amar, even according to the opinion who says miskarto lamaila aisa, that the frame was above and not below. But even so, parkude hava. I don't know how to say this. Miprakta. Okay. V'lechem begave de Shulchan Ava Yosef. Okay, I hope I understand this one correctly, which is that, okay, so this is the frame on top of the table version 2, the Gemara's new version. So basically, from the bird's eye view, so you have the full tabletop, right? That's the full 10 tefachim, 5 tefachim, 6 tefachim, right? Rabbi Yehuda, and the showbreads would rest directly on the table. The frame would be around that, right? So from the side view, or let's even look at the shaved in half view, basically the breads would be able to take up the whole width of the table, and basically the frame was kind of hugging it on the sides. I think it would basically be on some kind of angle. I think it would kind of start on top of the table, but like be angled away from the table. So the showbreads were able to fit snugly directly on the table, and the frame would then support it to the, on its sides. So even if you say that it's above the tabletop, it was kind of supporting from the side rather than taking up space on top of the table itself. There was no use for the snifim, for these panels to support the breads, to hold them snug. Rather, as we just described, it's the frame of the shulchan that went above the tabletop and was supporting it from the sides. That would give it the proper support. They said to him, "Ma pitom miskarto lamata?" I said, "No, the miskaret what is below, not above," kind of like the previous version. Sheesh, that was pretty tricky. And now we are going to have a discussion about the shulchan being mekabel tumah. Amar Yochanan, says Yochanan, Omer misgarto lamata. So according to the opinion, it says that the miskaret was below the tabletop, and according to that opinion, also Rashi says the tabletop was able to be kind of taken on and put on, put off. Now, tavla amisapeches tmeya. Okay, so if you have, so basically, the shulchan was mekabel tumah. The Gemara is going to discuss why, but the shulchan was able to be mekabel tumah, and it had this tabletop that could be taken on and off. It was basically a flat, like tablet, like a flat tabletop that could be taken on and off. So, therefore, if you have generally a flat tablet, it could become tummy, just like the tabletop of the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash could become tummy. But according to the opinion that the miskaret was above the tabletop, that means that the miskaret was kind of attached to the tabletop. You don't have this flat tablet because you have this frame on top of it. So tavla amisapeches tibaylach. So what would be the halacha when it comes to a kind of flat tabletop? Can it become tamei or not? Because the tabletop in the Beis Hamikdash was not flat; it had this frame on it, according to the opinion that it was above the tabletop. To which the Gemara says, "Wait, but why are we assuming that the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash was in fact mekabel tumah, able to be mekabel tumah? Kli eitza also lenachasu. After all, I would think that the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash that has the showbreads on it is clay eitz, that meaning as it's gold plated, but we're going to be discussing this. This is all going to be part of the discussion. But right now we're saying it's made out of atzei shitim, that's been plated with gold, but it's made out of atzei shitim at its core. So it should be considered clay eitz, asurim lenaches, that you put down and you leave there, like a couch or a refrigerator or whatever, a wooden refrigerator. So anyways, it's or a big wooden table that you take and you put down somewhere. You leave it. And any kli eitz that you put down and you leave there, ein mekabel tumah. My time, why not? Because after all, the puzzle says, why was it called kli eitz, so beged or sak? So we compare clay eitz to a sack. Masak metalto maliv, just like a sack is something that you carry it when it's empty, but the point of a sack is you fill it up, right? It's to be able to fill it up with stuff and throw it over your shoulder and carry it someplace. So a sack is something that you carry both when it's empty, but also when it's full. So also everything in that pasuk, right? Kli eitz, beged, or sak, these are all need to, in order to be mekabel tumah, it is something that needs to be able to be carried both when it's empty, but also when it's filled up. So af kol metalto mali v'reikon, and the shulchan, you fill it up with breads. Nobody's moving it. So it says the Gemara, actually, and we've seen this before a few times. Shulchanami metalto mali v'reikon. Actually, the shulchan was also carried even when it was filled up with breads. Kidur Rish Lakish, Damer Rish Lakish, Mai Dichsiv, Al Shulchan Atar. Why does the pasuk say in Parshas Emor, in 2 weeks from now, Al Shulchan Atar, that the Lechem Hapanim goes on the pure shulchan? Tar Michlal Deika Tameh. What is the aleph? Mishehu Tameh. What does it mean? That it could be Tameh? But also, yeah, exactly. Right? What can it be? Tameh v'ha I'm adding some words here. Klietza also l'nachisu, but it's a klietza also l'nachis. How could it become tummy? Right? That's exactly our question, right? From the fact that we're saying al shulchan Torah, does that imply that it can become tummy? How could it become tummy? It's a klietza also l'nachis. You put it down, you leave it there. You don't pick it up when it's full. So actually, also that we actually do pick it up when it's full. Le'ole regalim, to the festival pilgrims. Umarin loya bo, and we show the pilgrims the Lechem Hapanim v'omim lehem, and we say to them, Ru'uchi baschim l'fnei hamokim, see how beloved you are to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Kediv Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Dam Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Neis Gadol Haya b'Lechem Hapanim, that there was a big miracle by the showbreads, Siluko kisiduro, that when the showbreads were removed from the Shulchan every Shabbos, they were warm, just like when they were placed on the table, on the Shulchan, which is interesting because they were baked the day before. So I guess there was another miracle also. They were baked the day before. They were still warm on Shabbos afternoon when they were put on the table, and they were still warm a week later. Shenemar lasum lechem cham b'yom hilakcho, to place warm bread on the day that the previous breads were removed. The new breads would be warm, and we're comparing the breads that are coming and the breads that are removed, that both are warm breads. Even a week later, the bread remains warm, and therefore we're saying that the lechem, that the shulchan was picked up with all of its bread, I guess it's steaming breads, and showed to all the festival pilgrims, look how much the Rebbeinu Shalom loves you. See this miracle that the breads remain warm all week. God loves you. V'tepikli mishum tzipui. Why are we explaining that the shulchan could become tabeh? Because it's in fact like a sack, that it is mitaltel moli v'reikom. We do pick it up even when it's filled. But I have a better idea. V'tepukli mishum tzipui. After all, it's covered in gold. Gold is a metal. Of course, metal could be mekabel tumah. Let's go based on that. Milotanan. After all, do we not have a mishnah in Masechta Kelim? Hashulchan v'adulbeki, a table or some kind of a smaller table. Shenifchatu, that the tabletop fell off, broke. O shechipan b'shayish, alternatively, that it was entirely covered with stone, and stone is not mekabel tumah. V'shir boen, but you left a little shtickle, a little space, makom anochas kosis, enough to put 2 cups over there. Tmeyin, well, it could become mekabel tumah, right? If it broke, or if you covered it with stone, which is not mekabel tumah, if you left enough space to use it, to put some cups there, well, then it's still going to be mekabel tumah. If you left space there, or if the broken table still had space there to put cups there, it remains able to be mekabel tumah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, makom anochas chatichos. Okay, you have to be able to put some meat there, some food, something that you can actually benefit from, like eat. Shear in, lo shear lo. But we're saying that, okay, so if there's still space, so then it's mekabel tumah. But if it was entirely covered with stone, it would not be mekabel tumah, because we go based on the stone. So here also, the shulchan is entirely covered with gold. We should go based on the gold. Gold is a metal, to be mekabel tumah. So v'chitem, and if you're going to tell me kan b'tzipor oimed, kan b'tzipor she'eno omed, if you're going to say, well, it's different. In Kalim, the reason why the stone, we would consider the stone and say that it's not mekabel tumah, is because the stone was really nailed on. It was nailed on, stark. Masha'ein kain by the shulchan. The gold of the shulchan, the gold plating was not nailed on. So therefore, we don't go based on the gold. Is the Mishnah in Kalim Dafka talking about where the covering, where the stone was nailed on stark? Or maybe even if it wasn't nailed on stark. Is it talking about where you also covered up the frame or not? And Reb Yochanan answered, the fact of the matter is, Loshna, it doesn't make a difference. Tzipoy omed v'loshna tzipoy she'eno omed. It doesn't matter if the covering was nailed in stark or not. Loshna chipa is levizbezin, v'loshna lo chipa is levizbezin. It doesn't matter if the frame was covered or not. So we see it doesn't matter. And therefore, if the stone frame would allow, if we would consider the table to be stone because it has a stone outside, right, covered in stone, so the wood that's covered in gold, we should treat it like gold. regardless of it's nailed on stark. Okay, maybe we'll say, well, the reason why we go based on the wood is because atze shitim is very, very, very important chashuv wood, and therefore we go based on that and not based on the gold. But anicha l'Reish Lakish the Amar lo shanu ela bichli achsalgus. Okay, this is important according to Reish Lakish, who says that the stone is going to take precedence. The stone covering takes precedence when it's covering up achsalgus, which is nothing to write home about. Habamim din asayam, which comes from overseas. Aval, which comes from China. Aval kli mismis, but locally sourced mismis, chashive velo batle, and they are not bottle, even with the stone. Shaper Babble Rabbi Yochanan Damer kli mismis nami batle. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, it says even the very expensive and loved local mismis are also going to be bottled to the stone. So we should say that the atzei shitim should be bottled to the gold. Look, the Rabbeinu Shalom calls the Shulchan wood. End of story. If the Rabbeinu Shalom calls it wood and not gold, it's wood. And that's how we're going to treat it. Shnemar, hamizbeach eitz shalish amos, the mizbeach of wood, 3 amas gova tall. Orko was shalish amos gavoa. Orko shtayim amos, and it's linked with 2 amos. Miktzos low, and it had these corners, these horns. The orko v'kirosov, and its length and its walls, 8 were of wood. Vaydaber Eli, and he spoke to me, Zeh Shulchan asher lifnei Hashem. This is the table, the Shulchan, that's before God. So we see that the Shulchan is referred to, so we say it says Shulchan, it says 8, the Shulchan is referred to as 8. Now, says the Gemara, Pasach b'mizbeach b'siyim b'shulchan. The pasuk starts talking about mizbeach and ends talking about shulchan. We learn from here, Rabbi Yechon v'Balazu damitavayu bizman shebeis hamikdash kayo mizbeach mechaper al adam. That when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, the mizbeach would be mechaper for a yid. Ve'achshav she'en Beis Hamikdash kayim shulchan shel adam mechaper alav. But now that there's no holy temple, a person's table is what is mechaper. It says Rashi, denoisen pusa la'orchim. He gives a morsel to a guest. He gives a morsel to a guest, and now his table becomes like a mizbeach. His table is mechaper. Friends, that was Daf Tzadi Vav, Daf 96 of Masechta Menachos. Wow, Daf 96 was a very detailed daf. We learned about measurements of the Lechem Hapanim and the Shulchan. Rabbi Yehuda says that an amma is, that when we talk about the Shulchan, we're talking about an amma that is 5 tfachim. The Shulchan, which was 2 ammas by 1 amma, was 10 tfachim by 5 tfachim. And the showbreads were, 5 tfachim wide, and the bottom was 5 tfachim, and the walls were 2.5 tfachim tall. Rameir says that the tefach that we're talking about for the Shulchan is 6 tfachim, and the Shulchan was therefore 12 tfachim by 6 tfachim, and the bread was 5 tfachim wide, 6 tfachim at the bottom of it, and 2 tfachim tall on each wall, on either side. The frame of the Shulchan, it could either be above the tabletop or below the tabletop. That was a bit of a tricky thing. And why the Shulchan is mekabel tumah? Be'etzem, we said that the Shulchan is mekabel tumah because it is a kli eitz that can be moved both when it is empty, but even when it is filled up, as we saw that they would bring out the Shulchan before the festival pilgrims, the Olei Regel, and show them how much the Rabbeinu Shalom loves us, that he does this miracle every week, that every week the showbreads remain warm and fresh throughout the entire week for when the Kohanim are ready to eat them on Shabbos afternoon. Chevre, have a great Shabbos. Cheers and Chodesh Tov.